Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrien Ag Solutions, and I'm going to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. Well, I want to take you a little bit west here. This is a snapshot yesterday on Sunday in Omaha, Nebraska. The bitterly cold air that has snuck out of the Canadian prairies through the north central part of the United States, right through the middle part of the U.S. and over toward North Carolina, has really got the country on the chill for a couple of days here. Well, this is a picture of some ramen noodles frozen here in the cold air over Omaha, Nebraska. And the big questions we have to ask is that colder air that's in place. This is a snapshot early this morning on Monday of what our temperatures look like. Are we going to be seeing this colder air stick around for a while, or do we have some recovery in terms of temperatures in the works here? Because right now across state of North Carolina, widespread below freezing temperatures. And that's the first time in a while we've seen some colder temperatures. Now check out these graphs. Each one of them goes back 180 days for the state of North Carolina. So let's look at the temperature graph on the left. This would be present. This goes back 180 days. Now, when we look at this, we have seen above average temperatures represented here in the warmer or the red colors going back to just a few days before Christmas. Some of the colder air that has recently come in, well, we haven't seen that since mid-December, and before that, mid-November. So very, very anomalous warmth for a while. And again, a question we're going to answer is how long is it going to stick around? Now, over there on the right, I have two stacked graphs. The one on the top shows cumulative precipitation anomalies. So below the dashed line is drier than average. Above it would be wetter than average. And on the bottom, that's individual daily precipitation events. Now, this is average across the entire state. The very warm and dry September here, which you can see up here, maybe a little bit better on the top figure, has been slowly erased with time here as we've had a pretty wet go of it for the last several months across the state of North Carolina. There are some pockets that have been drier. They're right up against the coast. But overall, this is the shape of our temperature and precipitation patterns here over the last half year. Well, certainly over the last month, we could divide North America almost right in half, with the eastern half of the United States showing with much above average temperatures, while the west has been quite cool. And the big question we have to ask is, do we see this warmth returning, and how long does it stick around if it does? So speaking of warmth, well, I just want to show you what some of the other amazing things that happened over the weekend look like. This was from Maine. So let's head north of North Carolina here and get up to Maine, where they had snow ratios of 40-1. That's 40 inches of snow out of 1 inch of liquid equivalent. Very fine snow that happens whenever we get some bitterly cold temperatures in place. And I'm showing you this because we do have some early morning snow flurries across western parts of the state of North Carolina this morning. Now, north of there over the weekend, we had a pretty massive blizzard. I'm sure that a lot of you saw this on the news. This is someone in Newfoundland opening up their garage door here in the Canadian Maritimes up here just north and east of Maine, and you can see how the snow is piled up. We actually don't have official snowfall amounts yet because at snow this fine, those 40-1 ratios here, it drifts really well. And there's been some major problems in Newfoundland with just a historic snowfall event here. So pretty amazing to see that. Over the last week, we have accumulated quite a bit of precipitation in North Carolina out of these last two systems, with much of the state picking up at least 3/4 of an inch, with a few pockets there with 2 to 3 inches of rainfall. So the questions are, what about the temperatures first, and then where are we going with these precipitation patterns in the longer term? So over the next 5 days, the source of that colder air, which was here in the Canadian prairies, has moved now into the central United States and spread east. So we see that over the next 5 days, well, especially to begin the week, we start on the cooler side of things. But with the rebounding of temperatures over the Hudson, and with the behavior of things happening here in Alaska and also over Greenland, we're going to be seeing our temperature patterns change quite a bit here as we progress through the end of this week and through the end of the month. Now, certainly over the next several days here, it's going to be relatively dry. Higher atmospheric pressure is going to start here in the north central plains and migrate here over to the east, which is why you see in this map over the next 4 days, so this gets you out to Thursday night, things are relatively dry. But we are watching a system right here in the midsection of the United States develop midweek that by the end of this week will be putting precipitation across the Carolinas. And here it is. Looking at the overall flow pattern of the atmosphere, this is what I want you to see. This is a snapshot middle of the week this week on our troughs and ridges. We have a trough sitting here, a trough there, and a trough sitting here. We will certainly be getting this coastal low that tries to get right up next to the coast of North Carolina but misses and heads off east. That's this trough. This is our midweek trough that develops and pulls a system right here through the mid-Atlantic, and that'll be the one that gives us the best chance of rain for our next weekend. But my main point to share with you is there's big troughing over Alaska and over Greenland. And as a result of that pattern shift, these troughs, I'll put another X to the one I'm talking about, are not fully anchored to colder air that extends up in the Canadian prairies. So the translation here is the warming trend will be on throughout this week, even though we're starting off cool, seems to have some legs to it. It looks like it's going to last kind of long. So if we just now add the precipitation from that second trough that's here, we can see that by the end of the week, as that one pushes through, we could be bringing in some locally heavy rainfall to North Carolina. Let's zoom in and see what that looks like for our weekend rain. Possibly in the Appalachian Mountains, grabbing anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches. And as we progress over toward the coastal areas, rainfall amounts are generally about a 1/2 inch to in some locations over 1 inch. Now we're pretty far out in the forecast, so I can't nail down these amounts, but I do want to give you the timing on that in a few moments. So my bigger question I'd like to answer here, and we're going to look longer term through the month of February in just a moment, okay, is do we continue to see a wash, rinse, repeat kind of pattern? In other words, is it going to go back over after the cooler weather we have to start this week to that moderate and at times wet pattern? So what you've been staring at here are the winds in the jet stream level 10 days from now. And the key component is going to be the strength of the winds coming off of, Asia here. They are splitting here in the west, and I'm going to draw right now the branch called the subtropical jet stream. Now that subtropical jet stream, if it is strong, will help us resist getting the really cold air to penetrate pretty far to the south. And certainly it is because of the split that's happening out here in the Pacific Ocean. So I think a more moderate pattern is in store in terms of temperatures in the longer term, but also precipitation. I do think that we're going to be seeing quite a bit of it over the next month or so. Certainly week 2 looks wet. You see at that time period with that split flow, the northern branch comes like this and the subtropical branch cranks like that. So while we do have this system emerging at the end of this week here and moving, we will possibly see another one there and moving across this region middle of the week next week as well. So we've got a lot to watch in terms of precipitation moving forward. And just remember, our longer range outlook is for a wetter spring across the eastern half of North America. So let's now get into the details. I'm going to play this. This is the European model, the operational version. I don't need to stop it until about right there. Wednesday night. You just saw high pressure basically move from here to now be setting up right here over the East Coast, and that's been the only thing. We start off cool and we slowly moderate throughout the week. Our next system emerges Wednesday night into Thursday morning in the south central plains. We'll get through much of Thursday dry, and it'll be Friday morning I want you to start watching to your west, because at this time we will be seeing here some of the precipitation moving into the Appalachian Mountains, such that by Friday afternoon and evening, that's when the heaviest rain moves across North Carolina. Now, this is just the current look from the operational model run out to basically midnight on Saturday. By the time we get to Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, this system has pushed on off to the east. We will need to be watching for snow to accumulate in the Appalachian Mountains toward the end of this week as the system moves through, because we will have enough colder air at elevation here to be producing some snow. At this point, I don't know what those elevations are. The models have kind of varied a bit over the weekend and telling me what those temperatures are going to be looking like with height, but overall, that's what we're seeing. Now after that, we'll probably get another few days early next week of drying down. But as I said, midweek next week, we're watching another system emerge in the Central Plains. And just like it did, it seems to get to us by the weekends. We've got systems stacked up each weekend, it seems, as we finish out this month of January. Now I do want to step you back and show you that the coastal low that does form by Wednesday appears to stay far enough offshore that we don't get the rainfall in the north in North and South Carolina. So I just wanted to go back and highlight that one feature here. Okay, so from there, what do our temperatures do? Well, we're going to start off Monday anywhere between 10 to 15 degrees cooler than average for North Carolina. But as I play this forward, we're looking at departure from normal for our high temperatures. You see that as I get into Tuesday, similar story. 8 to 10 degrees cooler than average. Wednesday, the moderation begins, about 5 degrees cooler than average. And then by the time we get out to Thursday, into Friday, and Saturday, we go back over to a pattern that's now got us 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees above average. So we're going to see that throughout this week, our temperatures are slowly moderating. And the big question is, does that last? So let's answer that one next. So I want to take you out to day 10. This is the very end of the month of January. And what I see is this: trough over Alaska, trough over Greenland and Scandinavia. And as a result, any trough that comes in through the United States is not anchored to either of these features. Remember, let me get those drawings off there. If we'd like to see a cold pattern in the east, we've got to have a big ridge here and a big ridge there. So the ridges need to be in place here, and it's just not doing that. Instead, let me get those drawings off there so they don't confuse you. We've got a trough here and a trough here that aren't anchored to cold, so warmth builds back in, although this pattern stays wet. Now, when we talk about that, what we like to look at here, well, one thing is the North Atlantic Oscillation. Remember, the North Atlantic Oscillation's got to go really negative and stay there for a while. What is that? That's when a big ridge builds over Greenland. In the Pacific, the East Pacific Oscillation is positive. If it were negative, we'd have a big ridge over Alaska. And in the Arctic, well, the Arctic Oscillation is positive because right now the polar vortex is quite strong. The stronger the polar vortex, the more we resist getting that colder air into the Carolinas. And how strong is it? Well, it's currently sitting way up here on our graph with strength increasing as you go up on this figure. So we would need to see this come way down here like this and bounce around here before we could see any sort of a major disruption in the polar vortex, bringing in the sustained colder than average conditions. The tropics are helping out as well. We had a discussion last week about how the Mount-Julian Oscillation came out here into phases 4, 5, and 6. Now remember, 4, 5, and 6 are warm phases for North Carolina. It's phases 7, 8, 1, and 2 that bring in the cold. Well, this week, where are we spending time? In phase 7. But then it collapses back into the null phase and likely emerges over here somewhere in phase 5, which phase 5 is correlated with ridging along the east coast and therefore a warm-up. So the tropics are saying the cold that's coming in is relatively short in duration. And that's a big change over what we saw kind of a week ago, where we thought maybe we could get a little bit more extended cold time period. But model runs this past week, plus the evolution of the jet stream has erased that from our forecast right now. So put it all together. Day 5 through 10, near average to above average temperatures in North Carolina. Much above average here in the Canadian prairies, while Alaska goes cold and Greenland goes cold. Look at this day 5 through 10. Same thing setting up here. Now, is this going to be bringing in really, really warm conditions like we saw in December and early January? I don't think so. I think we're going to be seeing temperatures much more moderate, but not quite the blowtorch, as we often say, that we had earlier this month. So that gets you all the way out to the 4th of February. Now, longer term in February, the models are really hanging on to this. What is it? It's a split. I'll put an S over it right here. And if that keeps the subtropical branch of the jet stream really cranked, we are looking at a month of February that's going to feature frequent low pressure systems that move across the south over toward the Carolinas. And that's why when I back all this off, you see a wetter pattern in through this area. Now, we have been watching this carefully. The trend has been pretty consistent here, but it all depends on the strength of that subtropical jet. We need to keep a very close eye on that. Elsewhere around the world, over the next week, we see very wet conditions in Brazil's eastern and central growing regions. Now, this is critical. They're trying to actively harvest a first crop of soybeans. And why that's important is the crop of soybeans went in a couple of weeks late, about 3 weeks late, which means they need to get it harvested quickly so they can get the safrinha crops in, which is corn and cotton. Now, at this point, any rain in that area could be, well, slowing things down for the harvest of their first crop beans. But we do notice that by the time we start February and the Mount-Julian Oscillation goes back over into phase 5, we get drier conditions showing up here, Mato Grosso, Tocantins, Minas Gerais, this region that I just circled. Now, to the south of that, for you corn growers in North Carolina, I want to show you this. I want to take you to the state of Paraná, which is right there. They grow a lot of full season corn. They were very dry back in mid-December. Major deficit in precipitation and extremely hot. And we're starting to hear some pretty widespread result of this being a widespread damage to the corn crop. So that is giving us very supportive corn prices for the safrinha crop, which is 75% of Brazil's corn crop. So for you corn farmers in the Carolinas, we need to watch out for this. What's that first crop of beans look like? It's pretty well in the books. We think it's going to be about 123 million metric ton. So I just want to give you that perspective. To finish this up, one last global thing to talk about. Last night, more storms continued to kind of slam here across parts of eastern and southeastern Australia where those fires were. So this rain that came in, you can see the lightning from it early this morning here, is good overall. But with some of those storms slamming into some very dry ground, we had what are called haboobs. This is the outflow of a thunderstorm hitting the dry, dusty ground and just blowing it up out ahead of it. That animation you're watching there on the left is a time lapse, so this isn't real time here, but some strong winds and carrying quite a bit of dust. Now, over the last week, we have seen quite a bit of precipitation in in Argentina, in Australia. Got to get my geography right there. In Australia's southeast side where all those fires had been. But it's good for helping fight the fires. But in the same vein, I have to say that bringing all that rain down on regions that have been stripped of vegetation could produce a lot of very chaotic conditions. And by the way, one last thing to show you here. With some of these storms, it has produced some huge hail. Tasman Rose sent this video up on Twitter, and it just shows you some of the baseball size hail that's coming out of some of those storms we saw yesterday and early this morning. So globally, a lot of stuff to talk about here, but with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Have a great week. I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you.